So thank you so much for the introductions, and I have a fantastic set of panelists lined up here. And today's topic that we are going to be looking at here is AI hallucinations. Through the day, we have been talking about the power of AI, what it can bring to us, how is it going to change our life, both at a micro level and at a macro level. But at the same time, there is always this cynicism. There is a hallucination effect that we talk about when it comes to Gen AI. And what does it mean? We are all used to humans lying to us or giving us false information. We are tuned to figuring that out. Now, machines have started doing that. Simply put, it's where there can be false interpretation of data, or it can give you nonsensical output. It's one of the two. And thereby, organizations will have to now think about how do we build governance, risk control frameworks, as well as guardrails to protect their data and their interpretations when using Gen AI, right? And I'm a risk professional at heart, and I do that for a living, and very happy to have this panel talk about it through the next 30 minutes for us. So I'll start with you, Naveen. I gave you the textbook definition of Gen AI hallucinations. Why don't you take an attempt on what it is?
Thank you so much, and thank you 3AI for having me, and what a wonderful audience, as well as the flow of events has been superb and fantastic. So I will not give a definition of hallucination. I would like us to arrive with few stories. How about that? So we'll start with the first one. A father asked Google Bard, hey, can you give me examples of how James Webb telescope has performed, and tell me more about it. And Google Bard said that the first exoplanet was discovered by James Webb telescope. Well, the father looked very good in front of the kid, but what happened was this was wrong. This was wrong information. In fact, NASA had first discovered this in 2004, and this answer was generated in 2021. So think about it. So the recency of data of what was fit into the large language models, so the models made a mistake. This is one example of hallucination. Let's think about something a little different. So if somebody asks, hey, give me 4-word sentences of a landscape, the ChatGPT came back with a few sentences, something like, the water is blue, the grass is green, the mountain is rocky, and the grass is brown. Think about it. The grass is green, and the grass is brown. Is it true? I think syntactically it is true, because in temperate climates, if you, especially the Bermuda and the Zoysia varieties turn brown during winter, but the grass is also green, that grass is also brown. But is it relevant in the same sentence? Probably not. So this is called a sentence contradiction. And when we think about using these large language models and figuring out the output, it makes a difference in terms of the juxtaposition of these words and the sentences. So it needs to be almost near perfect. And let me tell you a third story, which is my personal example. I picked this big professor's name. Dr. Alan Kerman is a professor at the University of Ecole, and Alan and I sit on the advisory board of Rennes School of Business. And we were having this meeting, and I was sitting next to him at a dinner at Rennes in France. And I asked him, here is this 81-year-old gentleman. I asked him, Alan, what do you think about ChatGPT? He says, well, Naveen, I should not have an opinion about this because I'm dead. And for a second, I thought that I'm watching this Sixth Sense movie with Manoj Shyamalan. I pinch myself if I am alive. And I asked him, hey, what's going on? Tell me. So apparently, he looked up his own name, and ChatGPT came back and said, Alan Kerman is dead. Why would this happen, right? So due to the recency effect, I actually went back and checked what really happened. There were 2 people who passed away during that month in July, Bill Kerman and Alice Kerman, and the large language models picked it up. So this 81-year-old professor said it in a very joking way, but what would happen if the same mistake is repeated at a bank, at a hospital, at an insurance company? Think about it, right? So this, my friends, has hallucination. Hopefully, I've given 3 examples of what hallucinations are.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic, and possibly the most contextual way in which you can explain hallucination. That means we are going to face hallucinations when we use the data or the models that process it. That calls for ethical boundaries, which means how are we going to define the boundaries on where we can use Gen AI and where there has to be human intelligence that has to be deployed. How do we draw the border? Satya, would you like to care? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. So when you talk about ethical boundaries in Gen AI, like I've read an article just yesterday, so that's coming to my mind. So UNESCO, are you on? Yeah. So UNESCO has published a news article in that they have said that especially in the education sector, okay, so Gen AI has to be regulated because that is actually taking away the traditional teaching methodology and learning of the students. So that is again where you need to have a checks. The other one is like Government of India is coming with, we all know, data protection bill and a lot of amendments to it. So while generative AI is very widely popular and being accepted and implemented in many of the companies, so it thinks that it has to have some ethical boundaries on the misuse, because everything is very widespread in social media these days, and it can also lead to misleading reputation of companies, and there also you expose your own the policies of your company. And also like the source from where this data is coming, that is also very important, because these models, whatever you train them for a particular aspect method, so they take that and they throw you the answers or the outputs. So for example, if there is a pharma company, so they go with their own long process, 2 years, 3 years. We have seen even during the COVID vaccine, right? So test developments, research side is there. So just because of some patterns of a particular disease, they ask a questions and that says, okay, this is the chemical formula, go and make a drug and sell it in the market. So I think no one is going to tell it. So at the same time, there's a lot of legal implications and also data privacy implications are there. So which has to be very guarded in following this practice of ethics.
Got it. And we were talking about it during the breakout sessions that we had, and we're talking about where there could be a banking industry where the regulations are very high, and thereby the need to draw such boundaries is quite high. But Deepika, you did point out healthcare as an example, or there are certain other sectors where we have to be very careful on how to draw the boundary, and Naveen, you alluded to that.
So ethics are typically based on the level of trust that we hold on AI, the outcomes of AI, be it generative AI or any other subfield of AI as well, right? So, so when it comes to sensitive areas and sectors like healthcare, it becomes extremely essential for us to validate these outcomes from AI by a human expert for any decision making, right? So, and we have acts like the HIPAA, which is meant for healthcare data protection, which also ensure that we adopt these responsible AI practices. And there are many policies in place today which define what kind of data can be, cannot be collected, stored, even used for training AI models. And even as per the recent EU AI Act, we'll need to assess and classify every AI solution as per the risk that it carries. So given that there are so many policies in place, and we will also have more number of them as the adoption grows wider, I think we are kind of heading towards the safe zone.
Thank you, Deepika. And Itti, this question is for you. We are talking about ethical boundaries. How do we ensure what is done by the human and what is done by Gen AI or use artificial intelligence in that matter? There's something called embedded bias. When AI and ML came in, we were able to handle that with a level of accuracy by selection of data, because we influence the selection of data. But with Gen AI, there's been new content being generated, and that is driven by the prompts that we write. That is driven by the prompts that we write, which again has bias. In your sector, how does it matter?
Thanks for that question. I think whenever anyone thinks of bias, it's very automatic to start thinking about the financial industry and the regulated industries like healthcare as well. But I'll just start off with what Samir kind of started the keynote speech, and he said, most CEOs are white males. What do you think retail is starting to experiment in generative AI with, right? What we're doing basically is that we're starting to experiment with a lot more of content generation. That's where you're seeing retailers actually use generative AI, or they are bringing in generative AI as marketing or sales bots. Now, if you come from that perspective and you now correlate that whole white male CEO thing, now here's the thing, as a, let's say I'm a designer or I'm someone creating content very quickly, and I'm just going to say a successful man standing in a park, in all probability it's going to be a white male, right? Because that's it's been trained on, right? So for us, it becomes very important. And also like where your retailer is based out of, right? So a lot of these models have been trained on a lot of data that's primarily more US, European centric. There's no diversity in that data. So if you are planning to use these, for us as retailers, and especially me, because I'm a retailer who's in India and the Gulf countries, it's very important for us to kind of think about diverse data sets that we can train our entire model on. The other thing, which is very important for all of us to think about, is for the longest time, and I'm not saying that that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but for the longest time, the whole, ethics committee would kind of look at everything that's been built and then say, okay, there is a problem, etc. As we start using generative AI more, I think we have to pull that up right in front. When you're identifying your use cases, you have to bring in an ethics council to even identify what could possibly go wrong, right? Because a lot of the data that we are training on is already biased. And guess what? They're like nearly 100 biases, if I recall correctly, which has already been built into us as human beings. So we have to actually go ahead and see, is our data also picking up that bias? Do we already have it in our data? And ensure that the models that we are bringing out there don't have that bias, or we are correcting for that bias. You can do counterfactual, text generation to continuously test and see, once you've built your generative AI, that is it kind of dealing with this bias. And you have to also then go ahead and train your entire organization. One of the best things about generative AI is that it's for everybody, right? So when it is for everybody, all the training that you used to previously do for, let's say, just your data teams and your IT teams, now you have to take it across the board, from your regional sales manager to us, data scientists. We all have to become familiar. So for us, bias is very important, and we really need to start thinking about what is the data that we are using to build and ensure that there's enough diversity and inclusivity in that data so that it captures our cultural nuances as well.
That's so interesting. And I want to talk something about the framework that Itti just now mentioned, but we'll talk about data smoothing and then come to that. The other side, we're talking about embedded bias, which means what happens if we ignore the bias that the data may carry. At the other end of the coin, or the other end of the problem, is where we have data smoothing, which means there is a conscious effort that is made on data to remove outliers, edge cases, and all of them, so that the data is smooth enough to use. And that means there could be some critical factors that can get ignored, or there may be great opportunities that are available could get ignored. How do we handle that? And Naveen, that's for you.
Thank you. Wonderful question. Actually, let me start with an audience question. How many of you are very fluent with your mother tongue? Almost all of us. Almost each one of us are very proud about it, right? Do we speak the very textual language, or just like a newsreader would? No, right? How many of us do speak the dialect, a little bit variation of our mother tongue? Most of us, right? So what we just proved is that when we think about large language models, this gets trained on the overall lot. And my friends, the difference here is that the outliers are the dialects. So the large language models need to learn the nuances of how we think, how we come up with these dialects. So there is a wonderful instance that we worked on, and I'm going to give you a very real example, what we worked at Wells Fargo. A few years ago, the artificial intelligence COE that I run, we were asked to look at certain patterns in email data. We had millions of emails coming in, and as any natural language processing work, we started looking at deep threading, looking at taking out the signatures and the subject lines and stop words and all the regular expressions and things like that. We took out newsletters, out of office messages, and got to the meat of it. So 99.6% of the data was junk. So we were able to achieve at a relative accuracy. But along the way, we took a step back and we thought about, hey, are we missing something? Let's think creatively if any of the outliers that we have spruced or taken out has some value in it. Then the idea dawned upon us that there is a wealth of information with the out-of-office messages. What would that be? So from a banking scenario, let's say I'm a customer and Suprabha is my lending officer, and we know that the communication frequency between me and my lending officer increases multifold during the closing of the home. Let's say the closing is today, Friday. My frequency of connect with my lending officer is very high this week. What happens if Suprabha takes a vacation this week, as they should, and I do not get a communication back? Am I a frustrated customer? Absolutely I am. This is my dream home that I'm looking at. So what we have intelligently done, and this is not creating any other light bulb, but just putting together novel ideas, is that we automatically took the out-of-office message, paired it with Suprabha's backup, and we intelligently said that if I need a time-sensitive answer, that person is going to get back to me. So the customer experience was held intact. So what seems to be as an outlier was gold in this example. And we do apply for patents all the time. This is public information. That's the reason I'm able to express this at this podium. After we applied for a patent, we got an approval in 11 months, which is a record time for these kind of ideas. Typically, it takes 3 to 4 years to do that. So think about it when we look at traditional statistics, analytics, what have you. We are all trained with the outlier synthesis, outlier extraction, identification, what have you. We need to change our perspectives when we go to the AI and especially Gen AI arena. So hopefully, Suprabha, it makes sense. And
very, very relevant. Two things that came out. One, when we look at outliers and when we look at embedded bias, I'm looking at both of it in that order, there is a strong human intelligence that has to come in. Through the day, during the sessions, we've been thinking about what would Gen AI do, how would it replace a human mind, or what could it complement. These are possibly areas when the trust in AI framework is put in place by every organization. These are conditions to look at. When you validate the framework or when you validate the model, these will have to be considered, and I think that's a very strong takeaway per se. I have a rapid fire question for all of you, which I'll come in the end. But before that, I want to talk about data privacy as well, because data privacy is in the top of our minds all the while, with or without Gen AI. But now, with the mass of data that we are actually handling, and the amount of personal information, whether you're in retail or otherwise, the personal information that we have access to, the scrubbing of information from the web, all of it puts the organization using it at risk, and also the commitment we give to the consumers because of that. How do we look at addressing some of these privacy concerns, and where do we draw the line? Deepika? Sharing.
So, today every organization is concerned about data privacy when it comes to usage of generative AI. And each organization is also creating its own framework and zeroing in on certain themes and use cases for the adoption of this technology. But the question always remains, right? So since these models are trained on publicly available data, there is this risk of IP infringement. And there is also this risk of our internal private data getting mixed up with the data that the models have been trained on previously. Now, in order to circumvent this, organizations are looking at deploying these solutions only within their private instance of the cloud, and so that the data remains secure, and also looking at only zero-shot learning. Now, zero-shot learning ensures that the model only looks at the data, but no fine-tuning or retraining happens based on this data, right? So the domain adaptation is taken care of, but at the same time, the data remains within the firewall. So that is one way. And yet another way to look at it is a complete on-premise deployment. Some organizations are also looking at this possibility today because there are open source, lightweight models like Llama, Dolly from Databricks, etc., which are suitable for these kind of deployment scenarios. Right? So if we can customize these models, since they are open source, we have better control over them. So if we can customize for that specific use case, and maybe for applications where the intent is internal productivity improvement, these models are a very good route to take. So there are multiple options like these that organizations are exploring. But be it on-premise or cloud deployment, right? There are at least 4 different stakeholders today that are coming together in every organization, that is legal, cybersecurity, technology or engineering, and infrastructure IT, coming together and framing these guardrails, regulations around the usage of generative AI.
Absolutely. And the regulations around this is not going to get any easier. If you look at just in the last 1 year, the regulations that in the US, the states that are passing the regulation, and what EU says, so the PRA says, it's all in the same order to what you're pointing out. The next 2 questions that are going to come are for all 4 of you. And I will start possibly with Satya, but the rest of you might want to use the time to think about the answer. We constantly spoke about the risk that we carry when using Gen AI, the overall hallucination effect, the bias that may come in, there is opaqueness of the data, the audit trails around it, and of course there's a cyber element as well we're talking about. So there's a risk ownership, right? And this risk ownership, where will it lie? And how is it going to be defined? What percentage, or I wouldn't even say percentage, what is the risk ownership of the organization that is deputing or deploying the model, and the application providers from where we pull this? So that's something that's on the top of the minds of everybody who's trying it. I'll start with Satya, but would be happy to hear from each of you given various sectors.
Yeah, sure. See, the risk factors obviously are involved in implementation of these tools. It is not like who is carrying that risk. It is a collective responsibility of an organization, and in that there are multiple stakeholders like the CIO, CISO, Chief Digital Officers. Like they have to come together and put up a framework of some ethical boundaries and also some compliance, that how the employees can use these tools in their existing product platforms or any services platforms. And also, mind you, so there are a lot of biases, false alarms, hallucinations, audit trails, all these are involved. And this can cost a bomb to the company, a reputation of the company, and also there are complicated legal compliances which they have to face. So they have to overcome all these things by following the ethical boundaries while well practicing the Gen AI flag across the organization for different business units. And moreover, what I feel is when I interact with a lot of leaders, they are in a hurry to implement or embed in their products or services. So that is the tendency which I have observed. So since I interact with this lot of top leaders, so one suggestion what we tell them that, so it is not only the rush you implement it, but understand the proper use case, and the technical decision should arrive only after understanding what is the business impact. Okay, so that is very important. And also, while doing this, cybersecurity, again, it's a very important topic. So they have their own ways and means of putting cyber laws and following a lot of protocols within the companies. So like the network security, cyber security, others are important. So also they should come under that framework. So I think that is what I would like to sum it up. And just one more point before I conclude. So since you also mentioned about human intelligence, okay? So human intelligence is very much required, and it will be there even though whatever the GenAI tools come and go. Reason is, ultimately, they are the people who is going to design, develop, implement, and moreover, monitor how these tools are operating within the company. Because one small mistake will lead into huge penalties, compliances, SLAs, we all know that. And I'm sure everyone will have their guardrails for this GenAI platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Satya.
I echo Satya's thoughts, but look, if I just for a second think about generative AI as just another technology. You're using a technology. I'm sorry, I just called it just another technology. It is not just another technology. It's the coolest thing in the world right now, but for a second, let's just take it back to just another technology or just another thing that a company was introducing, right? Any organization, you're bringing in something new. You would definitely be thinking about, protecting yourself, your customers, your consumers, everyone. Why? Because reputational risk, right? So as an organization, if I'm bringing something into the market, I'm responsible for it, right? If I'm going to have it face off to consumers, I am definitely responsible for it. I definitely do carry the risk of that particular product that I'm bringing to the market. And I think for every organization, their reputation is something that they have to think about. And that is why rigorous testing, addressing biases, everything that we're talking about right now. The other thing, keep in mind, you're going to be exposing a lot of these to your end consumers. It is very important for you to also call out, or I personally think, it is very important for you to call out the intent. Right? So if you have a generative AI bot for, let's say, customer support or in, anything, right? You should definitely call out the intent to the customer that you're chatting with, a machine, and B, this is the intent, right? Because you don't want to get into, any murky areas and have customers clicking snapshots and posting them all over social media. So that reputational risk is something that's extremely important. And I think one thought I would leave everyone here with, because I cannot explain that in like a minute or whatever, go read up manipulative AI. We've talked a lot about generative AI and embedded bias and everything. Go read up manipulative AI and go read up on active and passive data privacy. That will kind of start making you think about what you should be thinking about when you're bringing in generative AI into the market.
Anything you'd like to add, Deepika and Naveen as well, quickly?
So yeah, like Satya and Itti both pointed out, right? So the risk is with every stakeholder along the end-to-end life cycle of generative AI. So for instance, as the end user of a generative AI solution, prompts, right? So we use prompts for getting the right responses from generative AI solutions. And prompts are very powerful. So for instance, let's consider that a child is trying to learn to read, right? So we as adults prompt the child through gestures, verbally, and in many other ways. The prompts in generative AI models have a very similar role to play. It's a form of a reinforcement learning, right? So, and they are powerful, and that's the reason we have a dedicated field of study today called prompt engineering, right? So they can both introduce bias into the models and also can de-bias the models. So the one way to be careful about not introducing bias is to use the zero-shot prompting. But if we have to absolutely use examples, it's our responsibility to make sure that they have a very neutral tone and they're very precise. And another effective way is to use the chain of thought prompting, where it is for more complex questions or more complex needs. But the prompts are very precise in that specific context, and also the conversational flow is maintained. So these are some of the ways that we can own the risk.
Naveen typically gives a story. Do I have one now?
I do not. Probably I have a thought. So, for the longest time, we have been stuck into the mindset of SDLC, the software development lifecycle. In the past 10 years or so, 15 maybe, we thought about MDLC, the model development lifecycle. So, SDLC came up to manage the process and efficiencies, but is the framework going to work the same in the future? Probably not with generative AI. There is this concept of responsible AI that we have talked about, we know, and the US is looking at the regulations in the UK and the NASCOM. Everybody has an opinion about it. But when it comes to productionalizing these generative AI use cases, we went from process efficiency, 1 dimension, to probably 8 or 9 dimensions. I think our mindset pivoting from 1 dimension to multiple dimensions is something that we need to go through. In my mind, I think out of these 8 or 9 dimensions which have accountability, fairness, bias, cybersecurity, and on, bias is something that I closely want to watch and bring it into my processes. I'll give you a quick example. My cousin sister's name is Krishna Priya Yeri. She always gets marketing mailers saying, Mr. Krishna Yeri. So let's think about these kind of small little things.
For the longest time. And Mr. Itti Singh for the longest time.
Yeah. So humans can make mistakes. Gen AI cannot afford to make these mistakes.
So before I go to the audience on a question, we speak about outliers, we speak about what are the risks that come with it. And we realize most of this is what we feed into the system. Deepika and I were in the lounge at that time speaking about our origins, where we come from. And we realized both of us came from Chennai. We were brought up in Chennai. I look at her and say, Deepika is not a Chennai name. And she looks at me and says, Suprabha is neither a Chennai name. Both of us are from Chennai, and we believe these are not names that girls at that time got from their parents. So essentially, our outliers start there. We believe we are not from the origin in itself, and we feed it into the system. I have a rapid fire. Think about it, but I want to go to the audience. The question that I have for each one of you is, let's say you take use cases, each of your organizations picks up a use case, and it goes live that midnight 12, okay? Next day morning when you're waking up, I'm sure you were sleepless, I'm hoping, or maybe if you're one who meditates, you might sleep. What is that one risk that will be on top of your mind when a use case goes live? Think about it. Before that, to the audience, if they have a question, we have time for 1 or 2 questions at best. Yes.
Hi, this is Avinash. I'm from City Analytics Information Management. My question is, while Naveen, I was listening to all of your stories very carefully, I was thinking the other side of the coin. While all the users and the developers need to adopt to this technology, don't you think even the regulators now have to think about adapting to this technology in terms of writing the regulation in a way that we can maximize the benefit of these tools? Because if you are going to stay with all the old school regulations and policies, we are not going to maximize the benefit of such disruptive tools in future.
Definitely, and my answer is phase 2. So phase 1, I'm sure the regulators are going to get warmed up with all of these Gen AI use cases, and there is this one magic word, Gen AI summarization. You can look at 400-page legal documents, summarize it within 300 words, 1,000 words, however much you want to talk about, extract features and build your own story with that. So I think this kind of interaction, definitely regulators would want to benefit and also govern us better and protect our customers better as well, but it's just a matter of time, I believe.
The same logic that we use to find false positives or look at cases on where a particular credit line is not collateralized adequately. That same data, if made available to the regulator and the power of the engine, will help them too. And there are certain regulators, I don't want to name them here, but in the financial services industry, some regulators, some regions are far ahead today compared to the others, which means they've already started using some of these AI and ML in their foray. Any other questions from the audience? I see 2 hands, but the one in the far corner went up first. But he found this person closer to the mic. You have to wait. Okay, we'll take both the questions and after that we go back. Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Amit. I work for a startup called AI Shield, which is in security of AI. We are in fact building guardrails for LLM. My question is a little bit philosophical. Hallucinations is what gives generative AI its power, right? You need to allow it to hallucinate, which it gives us the ability to generate and become this powerful tool that we have. If we bring all of these tools, or let's say a framework to control this hallucination, are we not reducing the power of it? So that's one. And the other is, do you guys have a framework around, there are areas where absolutely you should control this hallucination and hence not use generative AI. And there are other areas where you can probably live with its hallucination to maximize the power of generative AI. So I want to hear your thoughts around it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
You talked about power. Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility. Yeah. So, I know what you're talking about, hallucinations. Just keep in mind, I think one of the easiest way to think about this is if you are bringing in your solution, what are you trying to solve with generative AI, right? There is just, I won't call it framework. It's just a simple thought, right? Are you solving for life problems, right? Life consequences, like getting a job, getting credit, getting a salary, passing through airport, being, or, criminal justice system. That's where you cannot have hallucinations. You cannot have any of that ever happen, right? You want exact information. That's where you need to ensure that everything is cited and everything is perfect. But let's say it's not a big life decision, but it's just something smaller. Sure, you can experiment, but experiment within your boundaries, test internally, don't go, testing externally. That's very important. The more you test, the more perfect it gets. On the framework, if anyone else would.
I think our time is up, but just to call out one thing. Hallucination and creativity are 2 different things, because I think that question came up and I want to clarify. Creativity on what Gen AI can do, there are fields where that experimentation is very much in the bound and organizations are trying. Hallucination is where it can wrongly interpret a data or interpret beyond what it is supposed to. So draw that line. I mean, it's a long topic, not necessarily everybody will be able to fathom that, including us within the 30-minute. But I think our time is up. I want to take one more question, but he looks at me and says, no. So whoever had that question, we will have to take it in the lounge later. Thank you so much, and it was lovely to have you as the audience and you as panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.